Thank you for your interest in the Community Connect program for fiscal year 2019. My name is Scott Steiner. I'm with RUS's Washington office, and we will be going over in this presentation the general overview of the Community Connect grant program, and then after that a more detailed instruction on how to apply. This presentation is the same presentation that we're giving in a series of live webinars, but we are recording that for people who can't make that for timing reasons or have technical difficulties. So as background on the program, it was created in 2002. It is a competitive grant program. The program regulation is 7 CFR 1739, and this year the program is being opened up with a funding opportunity announcement that was published on the Community Connect website and on grants.gov on February 12th. The FOA sets the minimum and maximum grant amounts for the 2019 program, as well as the broadband service speed and broadband grant speed definitions that we use for eligibility and build-out requirements. We'll get into that in detail on the next slide. So here are some key definitions and limits. So broadband service is any terrestrial technology which has the ability to transmit at 10 megabits per second down, 1 megabit per second up for both fixed and mobile service. This definition is important because it's used to establish what is considered to be an unserved service area. The next definition is the broadband grant speed, which is a minimum bandwidth of 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload that an applicant must propose to deliver to every customer in the PFSA. So this is the build-out requirement that any system that's funded under the program must be able to deliver to any customer. The minimum and maximum grant amounts are unchanged from the last couple of years. There is a $100,000 minimum and a $3 million maximum. So now we're going to get into some program rules and eligibility. In terms of eligible applicants, an entity can be an incorporated organization, an Indian tribal organization as defined in that statute, a state, a local unit of government, or a cooperative, private corporation, or limited liability company organized on a for-profit or not-for-profit basis. We have bolded it here. Individuals and partnerships are not eligible. So the list encompasses most organization types, but we can't do individuals or partnerships. However, applicants must have the legal capacity and authority to apply for funding and enter into a contract with RUS, and applicants must have the legal capacity to own and operate a broadband system. So the entity type is pretty broad. If there are any restrictions that your organization bylaws or any state or local law place on you where you're not able to do either of those two things, that could potentially affect whether you're eligible for the program. In terms of an eligible project, the project must serve a proposed funded service area, that is PFSA, in which broadband service does not exist. That's that 10 megabit per second down, 1 megabit per second up. Offer service at the broadband grant speed to all residents and business customers within the PFSA. That's that 25.3 that we just talked about. Offer free service at the broadband grant speed to all essential community facilities located within the PFSA for at least 2 years, starting from the time service becomes available to each ECF. And provide a community center with at least 2 computer access points and wireless access at the broadband grant speed, free of all charges to users for at least 2 years. And it must be open and accessible to area residents before, during, and after normal working hours, and on Saturday or Sunday. So a couple of points here. The Farm Bill changed the definition of critical community facilities that have been used in the past to essential community facilities. So they're pretty much the same thing. Make sure that you consult the definition that's called out in the reg just to make sure. So in terms of an eligible proposed funded service area, the PFSA means a contiguous geographic area within an eligible rural area in which an applicant proposes to provide service at the broadband grant speed. Contiguous just means that you can get from any point in the service area you draw to any other point in that service area without leaving it. It can be very irregularly shaped. It can have donut holes that exclude areas where you believe service exists or are non-rural. So keep that in mind. Rural area means any area as confirmed by the latest decennial census of the Bureau of Census, which is not located within a city, town, or incorporated area that has a population greater than 20,000 inhabitants, or an urbanized area contiguous and adjacent to a city or town that has a population of greater than 50,000 inhabitants. For the purposes of the definition of rural area, an urbanized area means any densely populated territory as defined by the U.S. Census Bureau. Something of a mouthful there, but the main takeaway on this is that the mapping tool, which we're going to be talking about on upcoming slides, has a non-rural area layer that you can actually view on the map. And so the main takeaway is from a rurality perspective, you can't overlap that non-rural layer at all, or your application wouldn't be eligible. So broadband service cannot exist in any portion of an eligible PFSA. That's that 10.1 service that we talked about. Applicants should use all available resources to determine if broadband service exists, including FCC data at those links. A listing of communities served by existing RUS borrowers or grantees is available at our mapping tool, which is there. Applicants should view service provider websites and contact local service providers. And as is called out on the slide, all information will be independently verified by RUS. And so what's going to carry the day for eligibility purposes is that any application we find that is otherwise eligible and high enough scoring will get an on the ground visit by field staff. You have to have done your research that you're going to be confident that they're not going to find anything, because they don't have to find widespread service. If they find households that have service above 10.1, that application is going to be determined to be ineligible. This does not count private circuit kinds of connections. So if a local school is wired into a state fiber network, for example, and service is available at that school but nowhere else, that doesn't count. And broadband service excludes satellite service. So you don't have to take that into account, but it does count mobile wireless. In terms of eligible grant purposes, number one is the construction, acquisition, or leasing of facilities used to deploy service at the broadband grant speed to all residents and businesses in the PFSA. Buildings constructed with grant funds must reside on property owned by the awardee. Leasing costs will only be covered through the advance of fund periods included in the award documents. Number two is the improvement, expansion, construction, or acquisition of a community center and the provision of computer access points. Grant funds for the community center are limited to the lesser of 10% of the requested grant amount, or $150,000. If the community center is constructed with grant funds, the center must reside on property owned by the awardee, and you have to include funding for at least 2 and up to 10 computer access points used in the community center. That is a little bit of a change from this year. You have to use grant funding to fund at least 2 computers. Previously, match funding could be used for that. There's some different language in the FOA this year. The cost, and category number 3 is the cost of providing the necessary bandwidth for service free of charge to the ECFs for 2 years. So in terms of ineligible purposes, funds may not be used to finance the duplication of any existing broadband service provided by other entities, and operating expenses are ineligible with the exception of lease costs for facilities used to deploy broadband service and bandwidth expenses. There is a matching contribution for the program, so applicants must provide a matching contribution which is at least 15% of the grant amount being requested. Matching contributions cannot include any financial assistance from federal sources unless there is a federal statutory exception. If there is, in your case, please provide the specific citation for that. At the time of closing of the award, the awardee must contribute or demonstrate available cash reserves in an account of the awardee equal to at least 15% of the grant. The matching contribution must be in the form of cash to be used to fund operations of the project. Applications can be submitted electronically through grants.gov, or you can hand deliver or mail a hard copy to RUS. We ask for 1 original paper copy at least and 1 electronic copy on a CD, DVD, flash drive. Introduced last year and continued for this year is the concept of technical assistance. So prior to the official submission of your application, applicants may request technical assistance from RUS as long as such requests are made prior to March 31st, 2019. Technical assistance is not meant to be an analysis or assessment of the quality of the materials submitted, a substitute for agency review of completed applications, nor determination of eligibility if such determination requires in-depth analysis. The agency will not solicit or consider scoring or eligibility information that is submitted after the application deadline. The agency reserves the right to contact applicants to seek clarifying information on materials contained in the submitted application. So you can request technical assistance prior to that date. We're not going to give you an initial score. We're not going to give you an absolute determination of an eligibility, but we will give you assistance, things we think you can improve upon, answer any specific questions, any red flags that we see that would potentially call your application ineligible. So in terms of processing the applications, applications must be postmarked or received by April 15th, 2019. Applications must be eligible and complete, and applications must be technically and financially feasible as determined by RUS. Applications that pass all of those 3 steps will be evaluated based on the 3 scoring components that we'll talk about in an upcoming slide. Applications will be ranked and awarded in rank order until all grant funds are expended, and then we will announce awards. So in terms of scoring, up to 100 points are available, broken into 3 scoring components. PFSA needs, where up to 50 points are available. Stakeholder involvement, where up to 40 points are available. And management experience, where up to 10 points are available. As was the case last year and as is continued this year, special consideration area points are not a part of the 2019 program. And here's one of the significant changes that some people need to be aware of. The FOA for this year indicates that applicants may submit more than 1 application. However, only the single highest scoring eligible application will be considered for award. So you can submit more than 1 application. You may do that because you might have concerns that one would be found ineligible because broadband service is found, etc. However, only the highest scoring eligible application will be considered for award. This slide gets at the kind of concept of a tiebreaker. This is spelled out in the application guide. These are the kinds of things that if we had a score, 2 applications that had the exact same composite score, these are the kinds of things we could use to take into account to break that tie. So it's not going to come up often, but it's a good idea to address in the off chance that you end up in that scenario. This is our contact information, so that is our website, that is our phone number. This will occur later on in the presentation as well. So having gone over the overview of the program, now we're going to get into the specific components of an application and some discussion of things to avoid, things to do if you want to maximize your chances. These are the elements of a completed application. So you have the SF-424, executive summary, scoring criteria documentation, system design including environmental questionnaire, service area demographic, scope of work, community-oriented connectivity plan, financial information and sustainability, statement of experience, evidence of funding commitments from other sources, and compliance with other federal statutes and regulations, so a certification kind of section. When putting together your application, you are going to want to keep the program regulation, the FOA, the Standard Form 424, and the application guide handy. All of those are available on our website. So this is just a screenshot of a Standard Form 424, which is Schedule A1 in the application. You use this form to request funds under a lot of different grant programs. Couple of things, we're not going to go line item by line item through it. The main thing is that not every single cell that's in here is required. The ones that are required are highlighted, and then the application guide has some instruction on how to answer some of the specific line items, so make sure you read through that as you're filling this out. Schedule A2 is proof of SAM registration, so you need to have a DUNS number before you can register in SAM. These are just links and contact information for those 2 programs. You need to go ahead and get that started. Doing that registration is free, so there's even if you decide ultimately not to apply for a grant, there's no reason not to go ahead and do that, just to preserve the option. So what we ask for in Schedule A2 is a printout of a copy of your registration in SAM.gov and include that. It needs to show the activation date and the CAGE code. Registration must be active before the application is submitted. Registration must be remain current at all times while the application is under consideration. So if you're already in there, make sure to keep in mind that you have to recertify annually. If that's going to happen during the evaluation period, make sure to do that. Don't let it lapse. The registration needs to be in the name of the applicant, not a parent, subsidiary, etc. And a little bit of a change from last year, it must be accompanied by evidence of legal existence for the applicant as listed on the SAM registration. Evidence of that legal existence includes good standing with the body in which the organization's organized, so Secretary of State, for example. And if the entity is created under law, a copy of the state statute, regulation, or other appropriate documentation. Schedule B is the executive summary. So we ask for a description of the PFSA and why the project is needed, a description of the applicant, an explanation of the total project costs, a general overview of the proposed broadband system, including types of equipment, technologies, and facilities, documentation describing the procedures used to determine the unavailability of existing broadband service in the PFSA, a list of participating essential community facilities, evidence that any remaining essential community facility located in the PFSA has rejected the offer for free service at the broadband grant speed, and we ask that you include a section which has a publicly releasable project description. Schedule C is a scoring criteria documentation, so there's additional instruction in the application guide. As we discussed earlier, there are 3 categories. So PFSA needs, where up to 50 points are available, is broken into these sub-elements: economic characteristics, educational challenges, healthcare needs, and public safety issues. Stakeholder involvement, where up to 40 points are available. So this is just basically support from residents, businesses, organizations within the community. There are additional instructions in the guide of things that you can provide. Up to 40 points are available there. Management experience, where up to 10 points are available, so that's experience that the organization has in operating a broadband system, a project similar to what's being proposed in this application. As noted before, there are no special consideration area points for this year's program. Refer to the application guide for details on each scoring component and additional criteria that will be used to differentiate your applications from other applications. So that's that kind of tiebreaker stuff that we talked about previously. Schedule D is the system design. You provide a detailed description of the existing network if that's applicable, including services offered, customers served, overall sort of traffic flow, including connection to the internet. You will always provide a detailed description of the proposed network, so describe the PFSA, talk about the technology proposed, if there are any integrations or upgrades to your existing network, discuss that. Give a description of the design parameters used in engineering the system so that we can help verify technical feasibility of what you're talking about. Schedule D includes licenses and/or agreements required to construct and operate the network and the status of securing those licenses and agreements. Schedule D1 is a network diagram of the existing network if you have that, and the proposed network. Schedule D2 is the environmental questionnaire. We recommend the system design is prepared by a registered engineer licensed in the state where the network will be constructed. In terms of environmental considerations, additional instruction is included in the application guide, providing clarification on what to provide and agencies to contact depending on the scope of the proposed project. If agency correspondence is required or if sensitive areas are involved in the proposed project, start contact early. If insufficient information is provided in the application, RUS may reject the application as incomplete. Schedule E is the service area demographic, so that's a link to our mapping tool. You have to draw the proposed funded service area there. When you do that, you will get a reference number. We ask that you provide that reference number here and also the demographic information. The mapping tool will generate that based upon the census information on what you map. If you have any updated information you want to use, you can provide that as well. But if you do so, provide support for how you came up with it. That would allow RUS to independently validate what you're proposing. Schedule F is the scope of work, so it's a description of specific activities and services to be performed, including who will perform those activities and services. Schedule F1 is a construction build-out schedule where you lay out project milestones, who will accomplish them, etc. Schedule F2 is a detailed budget, a couple of items on here. The total grant funds shown on the budget must be the same as those listed on the SF424 and referred elsewhere in your application. Any ineligible items listed on the budget will not be considered for grant funding and could affect the eligibility of the application. The budget must include funding for at least 2 and no more than 10 grant-funded computer access points. So that's a minor change from years past. Previously, you had to deploy those. You didn't necessarily have to use grant funds for it. This year, the notice does specifically require grant funding for at least 2 computers. Here is a screen capture of the budget form that's available on the website. Just a couple of points to talk about here. So this is very general in nature, so your project won't necessarily use all of these line items. Feel free to remove or add as you need to. If you need to supplement it with any more detailed attachment, you can do that as well. Schedule G is the community-oriented connectivity plan. So list all essential community facilities located in the PFSA, give a description of the services that will be provided, the hours of operation of the community center, in addition to the activities that are available to the public. As noted there, the building must be accessible to all members of the community before, during, and after normal working hours and on Saturday or Sunday. That has to be specifically addressed in the application. Normal working hours are commonly understood to be 9 to 5 during the week. You do have the ability to address that. Any individual day doesn't have to hit all of those points, so you can have, for example, an early day, a late day, kind of a midday schedule that you do depending on the day of the week. The intent is just that the center be open a reasonable 40-ish number of hours per week, and people not be prohibited from being able to take advantage of it because it's only open when they have to be at work, for example. You will also provide a description of consultation with the telecommunications carriers and their anticipated roles in the proposed telecommunications system. And if you're going to be locating the community center in an existing space, you should provide an evidence of commitment from authorized personnel or owner of that space. Schedule H is the financial information and sustainability. So it's a description of the sustainability of the project. We ask for audited financial statements for the prior 2 years. However, if audited statements are not available, the applicant must submit unaudited financial statements for those 2 years. The financial statement should include an income statement, balance sheet, and statement of cash flow. Startup companies have to provide an opening balance sheet dated within 30 days of application submission. One thing to point out here is this should be in addition to the Schedule H1 attachment. That's the annual financial projections that's on our website and linked to in the application guide. So make sure to keep that in mind. Make sure to reflect all of your existing operations to the extent that you have them, not just telecommunications operations. So the next part of Schedule H is the annual financial projections. It must be supported by detailed assumptions that support the financial projections. As we talked about earlier, multiple applications from a single entity may be submitted. However, only the highest scoring application will be considered. As a result, in years past, we had a version of the projections for people who had multiple applications that got into a scenario where it reflected what would happen if they got multiple awards. Since that's not going to happen, we've simplified it down. Everybody's just going to do the same financial projections that includes existing operations, if there are any, carried forward with the project. In terms of frequent financial flaws, here are just a few. So historical financial data doesn't match the audit, so sometimes people provide that and it doesn't tie to the actual projections that they're making. Sometimes people make basic financial errors like balance sheets that don't balance, or cash flow income statements and balance sheets that don't tie together. Equipment purchased on the balance sheet must match the system design. So if you have a grant project of $1 million, that should be consistent with what's flowing in to your financial projections. If your financial projections show not enough cash in the 5-year forecast to support the projections, or negative cash balances, matching funds need to be clearly reflected in the financial forecast. It is part of your plan. If your forecasts don't include detailed assumptions, that can be a very serious flaw. Because assumptions are important, we're going to spend the next couple of slides talking about some examples of bad assumptions and a good assumption for the same kind of line item. So this is bad assumption number 1. Our company is currently offering broadband service and anticipates greatly increasing this service over the 5-year period. The company currently has a penetration of 85% for its existing service areas. The projected rate for the PFSA will be the same as our existing rates. So you'll see there's very little information. The financial reviewer on our staff would have an impossible time taking so generic an assumption and being able to independently validate that line item in your projections. So here is a good example for the same kind of line item that we just talked about. The company has been serving 5 communities for 3 years. Currently, our company offers broadband data service at speeds of 25 megabits per second down, 3 megabits per second or up at a rate of $50 per subscriber per month. For the prior 2 historical years, our company has had 70 and 85 subscribers respectively. Based on historical data, the company is projecting that our existing service area subscribers will increase by 10 subscribers per year over the 5-year forecast. Based on interest from community leaders, the company has projected that the PFSA for the Community Connect project will have a 20% penetration by year 5 of the project. Service plans for the new PFSA are projected to be consistent with our current offerings. The company is projecting 8 subscribers in the new service area in year 1 and increasing by 10 new subscribers per year in years 2 through 5. So you see this addresses the existing operations, how they will grow through the 5-year forecast period, and then layers on the Community Connect project. Has specifics, has dollar values. It would allow somebody to actually validate the numbers that show up for this line item in the financial projections. Here's another example. So for the bad example, customer care expenses are the personnel and related costs of providing customer care operations to customers. This is expected to increase by 2% per year. So it just gave a very generic description of what the line item is, put a rate of increase with no explanation of why. So to contrast that with a good example of an assumption for this, it goes through and says customer operations expense consists of the cost of customer care personnel, which includes 1 sales marketing manager, 3 customer service representatives, and the associated employee benefits. The marketing manager has a salary of $30,000 a year, and the customer service representatives $18,000 per year. Benefits include the cost of health care insurance, calculated as 8% of each employee's salary per year. Base salaries are projected to increase by 2% per year to keep up with inflation. So you see it actually lays out what makes up this cost and why it's expected to change the way that the forecast lays out. Schedule I is the statement of experience. So you provide a narrative that describes your organization's capability experience, if any, in operating a telecommunication system or any project similar to the proposed project, including the qualifications of key staff. So you can provide a resume or mini resume of people who have experience that would show your ability to carry out this project. Schedule J is additional funding. So there is a 15% match requirement. This can be, and we ask for demonstration of the ability to meet that. So that can be done through a recent bank statement in the name of the applicant showing the funds are already available, or evidence of external funding commitments. The match must be in cash and available at the time of closing. In-kind contributions will not be accepted. Continuing on Schedule J, if you are getting a funding commitment from an external source, you have to provide evidence of that satisfies all of the following. There needs to be an agreement between the entity and the applicant, or a letter from the entity to the applicant, clearly stating the name of the entity that is making the commitment to the applicant, include the amount of the commitment, state the purpose of the commitment, demonstrate the ability of the entity making the commitment by a recent bank statement reflecting the appropriate amount of funds in the account. The agreement or letter should be signed by an authorized representative of the entity providing the commitment. So somebody who has a position in the company where they're clearly authorized to do that, or somebody who has delegated authority, and you can show that. As has been touched on a little bit previously, previous year's applications needed to address the scenario where multiple awards are approved to the same applicant. Because we're no longer doing that under this year's program, Schedule J no longer needs to address the scenario where multiple awards are approved. Schedule K is the compliance certifications, so we're not going to go through each of these individually. The main thing to point out is that the ones that have an asterisk are signed off by completing a signed application checklist, which is on our website and linked in the application guide. So you don't have to sign those separately. The other ones you do have to print out and sign a copy and attach it with your application. In terms of common mistakes with applications, insufficient match funding or inadequate documentation of that match funding are big ticket items. Little or no documentation from community leaders or organizations within the PFSA. That's not an eligibility factor, but would result in getting a low score. Insufficient or no historical financials provided, so that's a big mistake that people make sometimes. Inadequate assumptions or no assumptions included to support the 5-year financial projections. Lack of specifics, inconsistencies within the application. For example, sometimes you'll see that something as basic as the amount of the grant request differs from section to section to section, which is obviously a big problem. Lack of details on the community center, where it is located, who owns the property, hours, numbers of stations, access and availability to the public, and what services will be offered in it. Seen it happen before where the PFSA and the mapping tool does not match what's described in the application, and anything that we don't understand about that can potentially get your application rejected. If you do a PFSA that's not entirely rural, if it overlaps that non-rural area, it will be rejected. All premises in the service area are not offered service at the broadband grant speed, so we've gotten applications from people who are looking at it from a perspective of just hooking up like one campus that they have, and they don't want to get into actually providing retail service to the community. That's not an eligible project. If the application is insufficiently detailed as to determine technical feasibility of the proposed system, detailed descriptions of the existing and proposed networks were not provided, essential community facilities and community center are not located within the boundaries. So for essential community facilities, that's not as big a deal. For the community center, that needs to be located in the actual PFSA, and the mistake that people make sometimes is they fail to recognize that out of the regulation. And so they don't want to establish a new community center, so they try to piggyback locating off in a community in the general area but is not within the PFSA boundaries. That will get the application rejected, so please be careful about that. In terms of what to do on an application, be specific, be clear, make sure all the schedules are included. So we provide an application checklist. There's the certifications that's signing off on, but it's intended to be a helpful exercise, so please make sure and actually go through that checklist and make sure that everything got attached. I think that's particularly critical in the grants.gov. That seems to be where people make the most mistakes of not attaching everything they need to. And make sure to check for consistency. So the application's describing the same project, so every section should be consistent about what it's talking about. If you're going to different sections and it's bringing up different grant amounts, that's a problem. In terms of submitting an application, you can submit it electronically at grants.gov, or you can postmark, ship, or hand deliver a copy to our address that's listed here. Applications need to be submitted by April 15th, 2019. Here is our contact information. You can call that number or send an email to our shared help desk. and we'd be happy to assist you with any questions you may have. Thank you very much for your interest in the program.